Winter 2021 started off mild in Buffalo, with only a few inches of snow in November and December. Beguiled by the mild weather, my neighbors and I speculated that perhaps the scourge of global warming had finally defeated the cruel lake effect that tore us apart every year. It was just an empty wish. January brought us sub-zero temperatures and more than 50 inches of snow and ice, ample proof that, at least for now, Jack Frost is still kicking Al Gore's inconvenient truth in the ass. Buffalo does a good job of removing snow from the streets, but driving has still been scary for most of this winter. As the owner of my own company, Jim Carlisle Marketing, I was in a better position than many. I could usually work from home, a privilege I shared with my employees when the weather got particularly harsh. We specialized in creating engaging, somewhat truthful sponsored articles that portrayed our clients in a new and surprising light. For example, one of our clients is Timber Valley, a local nursing home. Instead of focusing on the usual aspects like swimming pools, art rooms, and semi-independent apartments, we commissioned articles on the connection between exercise and anti-aging, illustrated with photos of Timber Valley residents on zip lines, jet skis, mountain hikes, and other strenuous activities. Sales increased 5% in the first quarter after we began publishing our stories. In the second quarter, we began offering discounts for family members who wanted to join, and sales grew 9%. Later, when we launched the hashtags Wild Retirement and Timber Valley for Life, they grew by 13%, and they still continued to grow. My job isn't rocket science, but I think it's fair to say that it takes a special kind of weird thinking to imagine the death waiting room as the next life adventure for the Woodstock generation. Luckily, I have that brain and seem to attract equally quirky people. Together, we turned the daydreaming that nearly got me kicked out of 6th grade into a career that recently crossed 6 figures. This doesn't mean I always had my head in the clouds. My job is to notice little details and build stories around them, so I consider myself pretty aware of what's going on at least until I decide to let my mind wander, which, admittedly, I am inclined to do. My wife, Linda, on the other hand, has always had her feet firmly on the ground. As an office manager at Sprague, Sprout, and Screwy, one of Buffalo's largest law firms, her job was to marshal a crowd of overambitious, oversexed lawyers into something resembling a functional company. I was a little nervous when she started working there. Legal ethics sounds more like a joke than a strict set of rules, and I've heard too many stories of workplace intrigue. But her first office Christmas party put me at ease. It soon became clear that although Linda was something of a mother to an office full of monkeys, she looked at her charges with a certain disgust and amazement. Linda needed to be in her office from 9 to 5, no matter the weather, so I was the one who sent our children, Emma, 8, and Tommy, 6, to school in the mornings and picked them up in the evenings. By default, this meant that I was the primary parent, the one who handled doctor's appointments and teacher meetings, organized birthday cupcakes, and drove the kids to playdates. I usually enjoyed it. My father missed most of my childhood, and I felt lucky to be able to watch my children grow up. It wasn't always fun and rosy. This winter, due to school closures, I spent a lot of time as a stay-at-home dad, suffering through the constant muffled sound of Frozen from the living room, and having to repeatedly interrupt my work to serve snacks, resolve conflicts, and tell stories to a couple of precocious toddlers. Despite my best attempts to get the kids outside, icy temperatures and huge snowdrifts usually kept us cramped inside the house. By the time Valentine's Day was on the horizon, I began to have a new understanding of why the Donner batch ended the way it did. I think it wasn't just the food. Linda had it a little easier because of her job. At least she could interact with adults all day, but I could see the walls were closing in on her too. In a burst of optimism and desperation, she and the other wives in our circle planned a big Valentine's Day celebration. The women did not skimp. They bought new dresses, arranged for babysitting, made reservations at a first-class restaurant, and found a club known for its good cocktails and excellent dancing. This was supposed to be a grand holiday to get through the difficult winter and recharge a little until spring. Linda's bones feel like a snake when another storm begins, blanketing the city with tons of snow and shutting down half the city. The club closed, the restaurant canceled our reservation, and state police advised everyone to limit travel to essential activities. Even if they hadn't spoken out, I'm sure Linda would still have wanted to cancel. The temperatures were well below zero, and her new dress and shoes would have looked strange over thermal underwear and wool socks. So I found myself on the morning of February 14th, removing 1.5 feet of snow from my driveway. We weren't likely to be heading out anytime soon, but with 2 kids in the house, you really can't afford to be snowed in. Plus, it gave me a brief respite from listening to Frozen. The irony of Emma and Tommy being obsessed with Frozen was not lost on me. If this sticky little piece of Disney brain candy kept kids thinking about the magic of snow and ice, so much the better. For my part, my thoughts drifted more towards Jack London's How to Start a Fire and that group of rugby players who crashed in the Andes in the 1970s. That morning the snowplow was being repaired, and I imagined myself working in a winter prison. Jimmy Dufresne's muscles tensed as he pushed his battered shovel through the snowdrift. "Is it cold enough for you, Red?" he shouted to his friend, who was digging his own ditch across the training field. "No, Jimmy, I prefer it a couple degrees colder," Red said thoughtfully. "Keeps me fresh and young, like beer in the refrigerator." Hadley, the toughest guard at Shawshank, screamed at the 2 men. "You are not at a tea party, ladies. Less talking, more digging." Red and Jimmy went back to work. "Cranky, crabby," Jimmy muttered, loud enough for Red to hear. "Almost like he's cold or something." Red coughed, something like a chuckle. "No, Jimmy, it's never cold in hell." Jimmy Dufresne was digging his snow and smiling his mysterious smile, thinking about the Rita Hayworth poster hanging in his cell, fluttering in the icy draft. It's fair to say that by mid-February, even my dreams were a little bleak. I hit Linda's bumper with the shovel and glared at the sticker she'd put there. "A woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle." Damn Gloria Steinem. Look, I understand Steinem's slogan. People essentially need food, shelter, air, and at least in Buffalo in February, a very warm coat. Love, romance, and sex are not that important. They are not needed for survival or for defining oneself as an independent person in the world. But why the hell do you start negotiations with, "I don't need you"? I mean, imagine starting a work meeting with, "I don't need any of you bastards." Whether this is true or not, it gives the impression that you are not committed to making the relationship work. After Linda put the sticker on her car, I printed a couple dozen of them that said, "A man needs a woman like a lobster needs a chainsaw," and stuck one on the butt of my Ford Expedition. I think she got the hint, but missed the irony. Truth be told, Linda is resistant to irony. I mean, she's smart, she loves me, and she has a great sense of humor, but sometimes she gets too caught up in one-liners. The future belongs to women. My body is my choice. Act with the confidence of a mediocre white man. A woman's place is in the House and in the Senate. It's not that I completely disagree with her slogans, although "the future is women" does annoy me. I am all for bodily autonomy, equal pay, equal political power, and equal opportunity. I am proud of my mother and grandmother, both of whom went to college, had great careers, and fought bias in the workplace. And as the father of a little girl, I will challenge anyone who tries to deny Emma any opportunities to duel. At all. Seriously, if a kid wants to be a welder, I'll buy her an acetylene torch. But the us versus them soundbites permeated Linda's worldview. At times, rather than seeing herself as a champion of equality, she acted more like a suicide bomber on the front lines of the war between the sexes, desperately trying to prove that she was a completely independent woman who would not succumb to the needs of any man. As the closest man in her circle, and the guy who sometimes had to ask her to acquiesce to our family's needs, I sometimes felt like I was being forced into the role of adversary rather than ally. Plus those "I hate boys" jokes really got on my nerves. This kind of fake feminism started going out of fashion almost 10 years ago, but don't tell Linda that. Seriously, don't tell me I tried it, and there's nothing fun about explaining feminism to your wife unless you have a very comfy couch. Fortunately, such disputes were rare. Most of the time, we were lovers and confidantes, passionate supporters, and best friends. We divided household chores fairly. I was the better cook, she was better at laundry, we both hated vacuuming, and we kept the house tidy. Given my flexible schedule, I usually did childcare, which I enjoyed, at least when we weren't snowed in. Speaking of which, I was also responsible for snow removal. And after the driveway was cleared and I had warmed up a bit, we both planned to spend an hour or two rolling around the yard with the kids. Valentine's Day in the city would have been great, but when I thought about building igloos and snowmen with Linda, Emma, and Tommy, I had to admit that my life couldn't be better. Linda was determined, so I wasn't surprised when she, Dee, Jane, and the other wives moved our holiday to Valentine's Day, now renamed Goodbye February, We Won't Miss You, on the last day of the month. The new and improved plan was even more ambitious. In addition to dinner and dancing, we were also going to spend the night at a nearby hotel. Linda thought that even if the restaurant and club eventually closed, we could still enjoy a night alone in a stranger's bed, doing things that would scare the kids. I was completely on board. By the end of February, I would have gladly given a finger to be able to gorge myself on expensive beer and honey-roasted cashews from the minibar in a room that wasn't showing Frozen. It says a lot when a picnic in a hotel room starts to feel like a combination of Nirvana, Shangri-La, and the last 5 minutes of 2001, A Space Odyssey. This time, the weather was kind to us, giving us several days where the temperature rose to a relatively pleasant 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Linda was able to remove her thermal underwear, and her blue sleeveless dress was a powerful reminder that underneath all the winter layers, my wife is a goddess. I looked good too. Although I've only been to the gym a couple of times since early January, shoveling snow is a great workout, and I looked pretty cool in my best suit. The night started off perfectly. We almost made it through another winter, the kids were fine, work was great, and we were in love. It's a cliché, but shared hardships do bring a couple closer together, and we were never closer than when we walked into Morrison's, the club where we planned to spend the night dancing before retiring to our hotel room for even more enjoyable aerobic exercise. The place was buzzing, obviously. We weren't the only ones desperate to get out of the house. It was a younger crowd, and I recognized several players from the Buffalo Bills, our local football team. On the dance floor, we are the embodiment of movement. Poetry. Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, minus the wig. My boyfriend is crazy, minus the crazy. Do you come here often? She whispers, her eyes sparkling with desire. Only with the right partner, I whisper in her ear. Am I the right partner? I hold her in my arms, with my own eyes. The only partner. It's nice when my dreams coincide with reality. When the music ended, we returned to the table. My God, Jane exclaimed, fanning herself. Looks like you melted the dance floor. Linda poised herself as she sat down in her seat. Yes, indeed, Dee said, her face flushed. Where did you learn this? We took dance classes in college, I said. It was an elective, and the professor assigned us to pairs. It became our business. One of our things, Linda corrected me. The table burst into laughter. The next dance is mine, Linda, said Dee's husband, Dave. Dee was smiling, so I assumed she had her own plan, but Linda quickly turned Dave down. No, today all my dancing is for my husband. Then she looked at me and her eyes softened. I think just one or two more, she whispered, and I nodded. It was a perfect night. And then Mark Lavaliere showed up. When Linda let go of my hand and hurried onto the dance floor with Lavaliere, at first I didn't understand what was happening. At first I thought it was a joke, that she would turn around and come back and say, "Just kidding, honey, let's get out of here." But this did not happen. As I watched them move across the dance floor, it began to dawn on me that my wife had left me without a word. In the blink of an eye, I fell from the family equivalent of a beach in Aruba to a snowfield in Alaska. I wanted to get up, but Jane put her hand on my shoulder. Give it to her, she said. This is Mark Lavaliere, the Bills' new tight end. I brushed her hand away, but she held my forearm tightly. No need, she hissed. Her fingers tightened. "It's just a dance, Jim. Give it to her." I looked at Linda on the dance floor and felt a chill growing inside me. Looking at the smug smiles of the women at the table and the embarrassed expressions of their husbands, I felt vulnerable, humiliated. I had two choices: follow the order and sit down like an obedient boy, or make a scene and make my humiliation even more public, even more shameful. Damn you, Linda. I imagined what I would do if this were a movie, if I were some kind of international assassin or ex-Navy SEAL with a dark past. "Mind if I intervene?" I asked, approaching the couple. "Find your own woman," said Lavalier dismissively. "This one is already taken." "Yes, busy," I growled. "She's my wife." "Jim, please," Linda said, her eyes glued to Lavalier. "Just one song." "I don't think so," I said. Lavalier had barely turned to face her when he hit me. Ibrahim Moses and Dan Smith, the Bills' running back and wide receiver, emerged from the crowd, but Lavalier raised his hand in the air and they stopped. "I can handle it," he said. "Hubby will be an obedient boy now and let us finish our dance." I froze. The music changed to a melodic instrumental composition. Conversations stopped and silence reigned in the hall. A flock of pigeons took off behind me. Smiling, I straightened up, dropped my arms to my sides, and looked up at Lavalier. He was grinning. "I don't think so," I growled. "I'm not going to lose to a tight end who flounders in big events." I pulled out my two Springfield Armory M1911, a 1V12S. Great deliverance. I rose from my hiding place, pistols at the ready. No, this wasn't any old John Woo movie, and this wasn't a nightmare. My wife actually danced with this idiot in a crowded club, leaving me standing there like a fool while she looked at him like he was hanging the moon and stars. I had no guns, no dark soundtrack, no offensive line behind me. Yes, I was in good shape, but I had no illusions about taking on a couple of football players. And apparently with my wife. And that's the point, isn't it? Because Lavalier did not drag her there with him, she went completely voluntarily. She dropped me like a hot potato without even looking back. Even now her eyes were fixed on him. In her opinion, I was not in the room at all. Through my confusion and rage, questions began to emerge. What kind of woman does this? What kind of person? I'm not pretending I wasn't blindingly angry at Lavalier, but was he really to blame? Sure, he was a creep who got his kicks from dancing with married women and humiliating their husbands, but I couldn't blame him for being attracted to Linda. Besides, it didn't seem like he made any promises to me or that he owed me anything. But Linda, she owes me a lot. She owes me better than this. Watching her on the dance floor, I saw something clearly, so clearly that I wondered why I hadn't seen it before, in all the other arguments and little fights that marked our time together. Lavalier was not my opponent. Linda was there. She herself made herself my opponent. Even if I had guns, a dark soundtrack, and an offensive line behind me, or, for that matter, if I had taken one of the knives off the table and killed Lavalier, I still wouldn't have won. Linda decided to do this herself, decided to put a few dances with this pomaded shit above our marriage. She decided that she was an independent, strong woman who needed a man her man like a fish needs a bicycle. She created this problem. I couldn't fix it for her. She should have chosen her marriage and me over. Whatever. She had to give in. Otherwise, we will break. So I sat there seething, lost in dark thoughts, while two songs went on and the rest of the table tried to make conversation. I saw how Lavalier nodded to the leader of the orchestra and how he nodded back. Songs 3, 4, and 5 were slow dances, and they came one after another. Lavalier's dance with Linda was a parody of ours. Instead of our graceful, seductive play and fluid movements, his dance was a dance of dominance, of a man capturing a woman as he stomped around the dance floor. Linda didn't seem to mind. Apparently, a little toxic masculinity was fine as long as she could be prom queen. Finally, Lavalier nodded again to the leader of the orchestra, and the music changed to something more dynamic. He and Linda broke their embrace, and he leaned over and whispered in her ear. Her smile grew wider. With one last squeeze on her forearm, he released her and walked back to his desk. She turned to me, and for the first time since that asshole took her to the dance floor, I saw her eyes. I saw how their sparkling shine faded at the sight of me. I saw her radiant smile disappear and turn into something cold, hard, and false. Crap. Linda could be a good actress when she tried, and she tried very hard, coming back to me. But she couldn't hide the look on her face, the one that showed that I had now been demoted from the love of her life to a problem that needed to be solved. She was almost there when Dee jumped up, her own joy adding to the dull despair in my wife's eyes. "Linda, you were amazing," Dee exclaimed. Linda's icy smile became wider and more sincere. My heart sank even deeper. When I stood up, the other couples at our table were looking everywhere but at me. Dee leaned over and whispered something in Dave's ear. His face turned red, and he covered his mouth with his hand. What was he hiding? Grimace? A grin? "Linda, I need to go to the bathroom," Dee said, her voice unnaturally cheerful. "Come with me." Linda looked at me again, and I saw her eyes sparkle. And I understood everything. Crap. Her body. Her choice. Crap. And then my wife left with her best friend, and I was left alone, feeling like the biggest idiot in the world. My body was covered with goosebumps, as if I was naked, and I felt everyone around me looking at me. I saw barely hidden grins behind their hands. I coughed. "Sorry," I muttered. "I need a drink." Dave began. "Don't," I growled. "Don't say a damn thing." His eyes widened, and he looked back at the glasses on the table. I didn't know what he saw on my face, but I felt a flash of dark satisfaction. My former friends were silent when I left. It was the middle of the night, and the bartenders were rushing to fill orders, but I didn't care. The last thing I needed was another expensive gin and tonic. From the bar, I had a great view of the back of the club. Moses and Smith walked down the corridor, passing the toilets. "Damn," I muttered as Dee came out of the restroom. She scanned the crowd, looking for me. It wasn't hard to find me. There weren't many men making their way across the dance floor, heading straight for the back hallway. But by the time Dee noticed me, I was almost there. "Jim," she exclaimed. "Not now, idiot." I pushed her to the side. At the end of the corridor, the exit door was already open, and I saw Linda hurrying to the parking lot, followed by Lavalier. Two linemen were blocking my path. I rushed at them. I may not have been an action hero, but I was pissed as hell. "Hey, Linda!" I shouted, pushing past Moses and Smith. "Hey, asshole!" I shouted. Lavalier must have recognized his nickname because he turned to me, already raising his hands, when I ran into him. "This bastard knocked me off my feet," someone said behind me. "The guy has talent." "Not bad," he grinned at me. "Not good enough, but not bad." He turned to Linda. "Go to the car. White Escalade." "Mark, it's okay, baby. I'll be there soon." I looked at her. I saw her eyes wide open, and then I saw how she began to calculate the situation. Her body, her choice. She turned away and headed towards the car. "Linda!" I shouted. She slowed down. "Last chance, Linda," I said. She walked faster. "Go home, Jim," she called over her shoulder. Her body. Her. "Damn you, Linda." She was almost in the car when Lavalier and his friends beat me. "3 against 1, I muttered, trying to focus my eyes. "Big fucking football coward." "If it makes you feel better, we'll have a one-on-one in my bedroom tonight," Lavalier chuckled. He laughed. "Don't worry, I'll return it tomorrow." "Don't bother," I croaked. "A woman who would sleep with a piece of shit like you isn't worth much." When I woke up, I was alone. I opened my eyes. Darkness, red flashing light, the smell of stale beer, the back hallway of Morrison's. I closed my eyes. I opened them again. A red light was flashing under the emergency exit. I looked at him for a minute until my eyes focused, and I began to think about what to do next. Behind me, I heard the muffled sound of music. Flashing red light. I felt drunk and sick everywhere. I swayed, but my legs stayed under me. Fine. Thoughts came slowly. I decided that the first thing I needed to do was get the hell out of this corridor before Lavaliere's henchmen returned or someone else decided to beat me up. It might be a good idea to go to the toilet. Clean yourself up and leave with as little noise as possible. Don't make yourself a target. Overestimate. Plan. Go beyond the vortex of why her, how could she, my body, in my head. I cleaned myself up as best I could with paper towels and water while I considered my next steps. Leave quietly. Call a taxi. Get to the hospital. This was the plan. The club's dance floor was crowded, and I felt like a sack of broken china, so I made my way along the wall to the front door. As I walked closer to our table, Jane saw me. "Jim," she screamed. Suddenly, all eyes turned to me. "Damn, Jim, are you okay?" Dave asked. "No, Dave," I croaked, fighting back a cough. "I'm not okay at all. Not even a little." "We thought you left," Phil said. "What's happened?" "What do you care about?" I almost whispered, having difficulty controlling my anger. None of you even checked." Dee was the only one who didn't look at me. "You knew, didn't you?" I whispered, approaching her. "You helped her escape, left me behind. You dirty bitch." I don't usually use that kind of language, and there was deathly silence at the table. Jane was looking at me with her mouth open, and Barb looked like someone had hit her. Dee's eyes flashed with rage, and she raised her head sharply. "Hey," Dave cried after a moment. "This is my wife." "Don't tell me about your problems, Dave," I chuckled dryly. "I have enough of my own." I looked down at the furious expression on Dee's face. Is she offended? How touching. I couldn't help myself. I started laughing. It caused terrible pain, but I couldn't stop. "What the hell?" Jane screamed, her chair toppling over as she jumped up from the table. "You don't know where I've been, Dee," I shouted with a crazy laugh, feeling the taste of copper in my mouth. "You don't know where I've been," I staggered. My legs became weak. Enough fun, and more than enough Fight Club quotes. I left my former friends. The doorman at the entrance turned out to be another big guy. "Ah, here comes our hero," he grinned. "Have a good night, Mike Tyson." And so I found myself on the sidewalk. The air was icy, and my chest tightened even more. My heart was pounding. "Fuck the taxi, I need an ambulance." I dialed 911. 911, said the voice on the phone. "What is your emergency?" "I was beaten," I croaked. "I'm at Morrison's, not far from the waterfront." "Sir? Sir?" the voice repeated. "Sir?" I tried to answer. The sidewalk was cold, but so comfortable. When I came to, my throat was very sore, but at least I could breathe. Antiseptic smell, equipment beeping. Hospital, God bless. I opened my eyes. Large window overlooking the nurse's station. My right arm was bandaged and tangled in the Roman IV tube when I pressed the call button on the bed rail. A moment later, the nurse came. "Don't try to talk," she said. "I'll get you some ice." She returned a minute later. "The doctor will be here soon," she said, placing the glass of ice in the crook of my arm and carefully untangling the Roman IV tube. "Phone," I croaked. "Please." She took a clear plastic bag from the nightstand and carefully placed it next to me. "Here are your personal belongings. I'm not sure where your clothes are." She chuckled softly. "Though it looks like you won't be going anywhere anytime soon." "What is today? Day?" It hurt to talk, but the melting ice helped. I found the phone in the package. The charge remained at 27%. Several messages. Nothing from Linda. "It's 4:30 on a Saturday afternoon." She picked up my card from the end of the bed. "You are at Buffalo General. You have been kept under sedation since you were brought in last night." "My wife," I began. "We tried to contact her, but she did not respond." "Don't," I croaked. The nurse looked at me in surprise. "I don't want to see her." I fumbled for another piece of ice in the glass. "The hospital has a policy of contacting next of kin, Mr. Carlyle." "I'll call My parents. I swallowed. Keep my wife away. She blushed. Yes, sir, she said. By the way, the police were interested in you. I looked at her with a question. It's standard procedure when someone is brought in this condition, like you. I can't talk to them now. I closed my eyes in pain. Later? Okay, she answered quietly. Anything else I can get you? Phone charger. I swallowed. USB-C, please. Let's see what we can find. If you need anything, press the button. She smiled at me as she left. I wondered if I would become the next juicy piece of news on the ward. I sent the parents a message briefly describing the situation, then sent Mrs. Porter's phone number and asked them to check on the children. They said they would come visit me, but they lived in Leroy, so it would take a couple of hours. They texted a few minutes later to say that Linda had picked up Emma and Tommy the day before. Apparently, Mrs. Porter was unhappy that we left the children with her until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Interesting. My next message was for my friend Bailey. Well, he's more of a friend than just my lawyer. We had known each other since college, and now he was representing my business. It's strange when the person you made beer bonds with in college now handles your contracts, but he never left me in the lurch. I began to realize how important this is and how rare it is. Bailey, I need your help, I wrote. I'm at the hospital, Buffalo General. We need to meet as soon as possible. Only a minute passed. I'm with the children, but I'll arrive in the evening. You don't need to leave your family. Tomorrow will do. I'm at my mother-in-law's, dude. Children are watching Frozen. You're doing me a favor. Perhaps Bailey should be upgraded to mostly a friend and also my lawyer. Dr. Patel came in a little later and told me that I was a very lucky man. Seriously, is this a requirement for doctors? Do they ever tell patients that they are wildly unlucky? He was a frighteningly cheerful guy. After the doctor left, I was still awake, so I checked all social networks. There was a video on Jane's Facebook page of Linda dancing with Lavalier. She didn't name names, but Mrs. Weatherspoon, a widow who lives in our area, tagged Linda and me. Crap. I didn't read the rest of the comments. I felt bad enough as it was. I searched YouTube for Morrison's and found several videos. Someone even uploaded a short video of me being picked up from the sidewalk by paramedics. Morrison's, Lavalier, and Cuckold led me to videos of Lavalier and Linda dancing, and several of me looking like a volcano about to erupt. One of them, uploaded by Moises, was titled, My Boyfriend is a Bull. It showed everything. How Lavalier came to our table, took Linda away, and left me with my jaw dropped. All this time, Moses commented on what was happening, switching from Linda and Lavalier to me. I watched the video to the end. I watched the expressions change on my face: confusion, disbelief, anger, pain, rage. After that, I was exhausted, curled up on the pillows. Bailey came in with 2 cups of coffee. From the staff room, he said, handing me one. Bailey, you old son of a bitch, I laughed. You've only been here 5 minutes, and you've already charmed the staff. I took a sip and almost spat it out. Damn, you call this coffee? He grinned. It does its job, JC. Now tell me what happened. When I told him everything, Bailey's face became gloomy. I've heard similar stories before, he said. Believe it or not, you're lucky. You and Dr. Patel could go on tour, I grumbled. I don't feel lucky. There's a lot you don't know, JC. There are rumors about Lavalier and his gang. Looks like our famous tight end has gotten involved with some very bad people. During the off-season, he and his teammates began participating in some kind of cuckolding ring. They seduce married women and then blackmail their husbands. If they got to Linda, they may have already done the same to the other wives in your group. Damn man, Morrison's is their hunting ground. I thought about Dee. Everything was starting to come together. How did this not make the news, if I knew? It's all business, JC. Buffalo News editor-in-chief, mayor, police chief, judges, NFL commissioner. They are all under blackmail. They even killed one guy. Official reports say it was suicide. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Blackmail, extortion, human trafficking, capsules, and at least one likely rigged playoff game. That'll be more than a 5-yard penalty, I growled. What can we do? Well, there is one camp in the West. I can send you there for safety. When I woke up, I muttered something about not wanting steak. It took a minute to realize that I was still in the hospital, that Linda, for all her cruelty, was probably not an assassin sent to cage me, and that I was craving a cup of coffee. By the time Bailey and my parents arrived at the hospital, the nightmare had faded, and I felt much better. I waited until everyone had gathered. I didn't want to tell my story twice. Mom and Dad didn't believe me right away, but social media didn't leave much room for doubt. However, like my medical record, say what you will about hospitals, they do a good job of dealing with the question of whether someone has been severely beaten. I wish we had video of them beating you, JC, Bailey said. Sorry I didn't write it down, dude, I coughed. Maybe if I had a little more time to prepare. Dad smiled, but Mom looked pretty shocked. I remembered the flashing red light in the back hallway. Hey, is there a way to get the footage from the cameras inside the club? Without a warrant, there is no trial, Bailey said. But if we can prove that a crime was committed. Well, I definitely didn't do it to myself, I said. You know, the police came this morning, but I was still unconscious. Can I apply? This will seal my charges against Lavalier, Moses, and Smith. This is a good start, he said. I'll call them. If you're ready, we can talk to them tomorrow. Will do. And you know, if we need proof, there's always my face. I remembered my dream. What if it's a conspiracy, Bailey? He looked at me strangely. Look, I'll bet you anything that this isn't the first time Lavalier has done this. First, he signaled to the band leader. Secondly, Moses turned on the camera before Lavalier even approached our table, which suggests that he knew what was going to happen. Thirdly, they knew this place very well. How did Lavalier know about the back exit? How did he know to grab Linda coming out of the restroom? Why were the other players there? Damn, man, if I hadn't been watching all this from the bar, they would have quietly left. So you're suggesting that Lavalier regularly visits this place, stealing some unfortunate wife from her husband? He saw my expression. Sorry, dude. Anyway, he takes his wife away, goes out the back door, and takes her home. Something like that. If my husband catches them like I did, he gets a beating. Meanwhile, the club gains prestige from the fact that famous football players hang out with them. Bailey chuckled. Famous? Let's not exaggerate, JC. It's just the Bills. I smiled back. Okay, smart guy, regionally famous. Either way, Lavalier tips the bandleader to play slow songs to seduce him and keeps his teammates nearby in case things go wrong. He thought about it. Interesting theory, but how do you prove it? If he's done this before, he's probably left marks on the video like the ones from last night, not to mention a lot of hurt husbands who will want to tell their stories. I'll check social media, maybe send a few messages. I'll see what I can find. I leaned back against the pillows. My mind was filled with unanswered questions and possible clues, but I needed to focus on what was most important, Linda. While we're at it, could you find me a divorce lawyer? Maybe someone from your company. Divorce, my mother gasped. Jim, it's so fast. You are sure? I looked at my father. His eyes were sad, but he nodded slightly. Mom, she cheated on me, left me humiliated in front of everyone, turned her back on me when I fought to protect our marriage. At the moment, I don't feel safe living in the same house with her. My mother's face turned white. Jim, don't you think she hurt me? Will I let someone beat me up to get what they want? I closed my eyes, took a deep breath. Mom, I don't think so. I know. I can't trust her. After that, there was nothing left to talk about. I did my research and Bailey did his, and when we met with the police on Sunday afternoon, we had a basis for the case. They were skeptical about my story, but when I showed them the video from Friday night, their interest was piqued. When I showed them a series of videos of Lavalier at Morrison's over the past 6 months, their grins disappeared. I think, combined with my medical records, the story started to come together for them too. Later, my parents brought the kids to visit me, and we had a great time curled up in my hospital bed watching Frozen on Emma's iPad. Given my mother's reaction to my divorce petition, I expected her to insist on reconciliation, but she surprised me. On Sunday, according to her father, she gave Linda a real headache. I never found out what she said, but it became clear that Linda was not going to come to the hospital anytime soon. While I was watching Frozen with my kids, plans for revenge began to form in my head, but they were just dreams. I couldn't fight, I couldn't maim, I didn't have the money to hire someone to kill Lavalier, and I wasn't about to send the mother of my children to a Mexican brothel. After all, I had a good lawyer, a fairly healthy bank account, a growing business, and a knack for storytelling. Good stories. Compelling stories. I started thinking about storytelling, about public history. Considering my professional life, I'm surprised it took me so long. I blame the concussion. Jane's post received a couple hundred comments, ranging from those who chided me for being weak to those who condemned Linda for cheating. This was about what I expected. I created my own post and linked it to hers. Dear friends, family, and neighbors, as you may have heard, my wife Linda cheated on me on Friday night. You may have seen the video of her dancing with Mark Lavalier, our famous tight end. But these videos don't tell the whole story, and I think you deserve to know everything that happened. I've laid out my story and added links to all the videos I've collected. I noted all the participants, including Moses, Smith, Lavalier, Morrison's Club, and the people sitting at our table. I even found the page of the band playing that night and mentioned them too. In conclusion, I wrote, "So this is what happened. My wife cheated on me with one of the most famous athletes in our city. When I objected, he and his comrades sent me to the hospital. As far as I can tell, this was done with the consent and in some cases, the active support of our friends, the club we were at, and even the band that played at Morrison's. I'm proud to have always taken care of my family, but when you're faced with a Bills offensive line, a table of backstabbing friends, and a wife who decided a night of fun was worth more than her marriage, well, there's not much you can do about it. I have already filed a police report detailing the events of that night, and will begin divorce proceedings with Linda as soon as possible. In the meantime, I hope you all take this opportunity to reflect on what each of us owes to each other. Think about loyalty. Think about love. Think about friendship. And while you're thinking about it, think twice before heading to Morrison's on a Friday night. Bailey thought it was a bit preaky and perhaps bordered on online aggression. But then a random Gen Z guy who just happened to be the grandson of a Timber Ridge client and just happened to love ziplining did a dramatic reading of my TikTok post, and the whole thing went viral. Naturally, Bailey was furious. Fortunately, the Dawes concern was not online aggression, but physical assault, and she obtained a court order requiring Morrison's to turn over video footage from February 28th. At first, the club's management balked, claiming that their security cameras weren't working that night, but when prosecutors extended the warrant to 12 other nights, when Lavalier was seen on video with someone else's wife, they apparently decided it was time to give up. The prosecutor also demanded that Lavalier submit his Super Bowl ring for forensic analysis, which caught the attention of Bills management. Lavalier, Moses, and Smith were suspended from the team. It didn't mean much since the season was already over, but the fact itself was important. Meanwhile, Bailey found me a divorce lawyer. Dolores Cartwright was a woman without any frills, straightforward and fortunately, ready to make home visits, that is, to the hospital. In the absence of real evidence of betrayal, we followed the path of irreconcilable discord. I demanded primary custody, a home, and full control of my business. In response, I offered our entire savings and agreed to take full responsibility for the mortgage with the understanding that we would split the equity when Tommy went to college. Based on standard calculations, alimony and child payments were practically balanced. It was a generous offer, especially since I did not insist that the prosecutor charge Linda as an accomplice in my attack. However, according to the terms, Linda will have to move out as soon as I am fully recovered and able to take care of the children. We agreed that if she objected, we would file a claim for cruel and inhumane treatment. Even if the judge does not satisfy it, it will definitely ruin her reputation in society. With Dolores' guidance, I closed our joint credit cards, took Linda off my insurance, and did all the other little things you do when you decide to separate from your spouse. Linda and I had always kept separate bank accounts at her insistence, so separating finances was fairly easy. While I was dealing with all the legal issues, Linda was doing her own PR. When her mother forbade her to come to the hospital, she began to complain to everyone who would listen about how unfair I was treating her. She also responded to my Facebook post, stating that she didn't know what happened after she turned her back on me in the parking lot and reasserting her right to enjoy the opportunities that came her way. I, of course, disagreed, as did almost everyone who commented on her post. I had fun reading the reactions, although it still hurt to laugh. A few days later, Dr. Patel told me that since the morgue didn't want me, he would let me go out the front door. I faked a chuckle and told him not to quit his day job. I stayed with my parents while I recovered. Mom and Dad dropped off and picked up the kids several times, which gave me the opportunity to keep in touch with them and to watch Frozen a few more times. I'm not sure if it helped my recovery, but having Emma and Tommy around definitely lifted my spirits. Lying in my old bed at my parents' house, I thought a lot about my relationship with Linda. I realized that I had been living in a sort of self-induced fog for the past few years. Between kids, work, politics, the weather, and a host of other things, I chose to ignore Linda's anti-male comments, her fits of arrogance, her need for control, and a host of other little warning signs. I wrote it off as anomalies when in fact it was an important part of her character. The person I thought she was would never have done what she did to me. Therefore, the person I thought she was, well, she wasn't the real Linda. After a week, I felt much better. The bruises had not yet gone away, the scars had not yet healed, and the splint on my arm had not yet been removed. But I could already walk, get dressed, and breathe almost normally. By that time, Linda had already received my divorce petition. Bailey hasn't heard back from her yet, but my parents have. She wanted to talk. I sent her a message to arrange a meeting at my parents' house. When she walked in wearing a blue dress, luckily not that blue dress, I experienced déjà vu. I remembered the last time we met. She's in a blue dress, I'm in a suit, and we're heading to Morrison's. I thought about how one night illuminated so many of our relationships and how, in the light of day, the relationships I thought we had were gone. However, even when feelings fade and hearts are broken, manners still remain. "Linda," I said, "you look good." Linda smiled shyly. "You too, Jim." The lie almost sounded sincere. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." I shrugged. It was necessary. We have 2 children. We need to be able to get along for their sake, if not for anything else. I imagined Atticus Finch, Perry Mason, Longfellow Deeds, people who had the words, the eloquence, the righteousness to face this moment and prevail. No, it must be me. My words and the usual scenario will not work here. What do you see, Linda? What do you want to achieve with this conversation? Linda hesitated for a second. I didn't say the words she expected. "Jim, if I had known I would hurt you, I never would have." "Enough." I cut her off abruptly. She flinched as if I had hit her. "Enough with this. It didn't mean anything. It was just one night. It was just sex enough. And while we're at it, let's just skip the next part. If you had just let me have this night, if you hadn't followed me, it's your fault you got hurt. Let's just skip to the end. What's your ultimate plan? What do you want?" Linda wasn't ready to see this side of me. She blinked. I want you to come home," she said softly, carefully. "I want you to be with the children. You can leave that too. You have no right to play the children or loving wife card. While I was fighting for our family on Friday night, you were running away with a big, strong athlete." Her eyes widened. Didn't think I saw that, did I? Congratulations, Linda. You got what you wanted. You got a football player, and now you can show it off to Dee and the girls. But you don't have the right to hide behind your kids just because you now realize that the price for your big night was higher than you expected. Then I said the words that I knew would really hurt her. Besides, the question is not whether I will return home. I'll come back. The question is whether you will stay there. Jim, of course I'll stay there. Her eyes narrowed. And if you try to take the children away from me, you will lose. The wife always gets the children. Everyone knows this. No, dear, children are given to those who take care of them. The one who prepares lunches, takes the children to school and picks them up, takes her to doctor's appointments and parent-teacher conferences. Which of us do you think does this? She blushed with anger. I care about our family. We do this together. We are equal. An expression of triumph appeared on her face, as if she had found the treasured phrase that would fix everything. Equals. The problem is that our night at Morrison's took all the magic out of the word. I sighed. You always said that we are equal, partners. But that's not what you really believe, is it? I've spent years listening to your caustic comments about boys being led by the nose, being slaves to toxic masculinity, having the emotional depth of a cocker spaniel. And you always ended with something like, but not you, dear. You are different. You are special. But you didn't really believe it, did you? You believed that you could use your children as leverage to bring home your simple, slightly slow-witted husband, and then you lead him by the nose until everything calms down. Sorry, Linda. She tried to look confident, but couldn't. Come on, Jim. Are you really ready to give up everything, children, family, our sex life, because of one night? I snorted. Here's the thing, Linda. I never really had you, did I? Friday night proved that. And sex. I stopped. Do I really want to say this? Then I saw a subtle smile flash across her face, the one that said that after Mark I would always be in second place. That she was an alpha who managed to get a football star, and I was just a beta who was lucky to be with her. To hell with it, why not? Well, sex isn't as much of an advantage as you think. Her jaw dropped. Sorry, Linda, but you're not the best sex I've ever had. Honestly, you're not even in the top 5. But you, she muttered. Here's a secret, Linda. The best sex is something that's free. It's something unkempt, messy, and funny. This is not a struggle for power or dominance or politically correct negotiations. In bed, at least with me, you have so many barriers and walls and rules that I wonder if you could ever truly relax. I shrugged. I'm guessing you may have relaxed with Mark, but I'd be surprised if you were even in his top 100. If I had to bet, I'd bet that the most exciting thing for him that night was taking you away from me. My guess, there are some problems with his father and suppressed gayness, but this is between him and his psychotherapist. What? No, he chose me. I was the most beautiful woman there. Do yourself a favor and look up Lavalier and Morrison's on YouTube. Mark's big hobby is going to Morrison's on Fridays and stealing women from their husbands. You weren't some great victory. At best, you were Friday's prize, a weekly trophy that he gets for being the biggest and strongest athlete in the establishment. I'm not a trophy. Her face turned red. She was furious. This is incredibly offensive. I chuckled. You're right, that's how it is. But let's be clear, I didn't say that. It's you. Before that night, I would never have said that you were some mindless prize passed from man to man. I shrugged. But you proved me wrong. You showed me that you wouldn't think twice about sacrificing our marriage, our family, and even yourself for the sake of showing off and your stupid little Cinderella fantasy with some second-rate celebrity. Damn you, Jim. He was a trophy. He was the best man in the room, and I got him. You should be proud of this. Be proud of your wife, who is so attractive that she managed to get the sexiest guy in the club. But your ego couldn't handle it. I wonder if she heard the words she spoke. Did she realize that with every word she was burying her wedding deeper and deeper? I knew I couldn't reach her, but something, perhaps our time together, or the love I still felt for her made me want to try. Toxic male ego, huh? I've been waiting for this moment. Now are you going to start telling me how pathetic it is when a man relies on force and aggression to get what he wants? How weak are we? I smiled grimly. And to prove this, what did you do? I turned my back on the man who took care of our family for 10 years. Got attached to a beefy, handsome guy who did everything except drag you home by your hair. He didn't. I raised my hand. How many times have we talked about how disdainful it is when men use violence and aggression to get what they want without the consent of those around them? But that's exactly what Marc Lavalier did on Friday. And you, a woman who preaches equality and claims to value loyalty, turned her back on her faithful husband and used toxic femininity to get what she wanted. Toxic femininity, she snorted. This doesn't exist at all. Of course it exists, Linda. What else can you call a situation where a woman uses her body to seduce a random guy, even at the cost of her family, when she publicly humiliates the man she claims to love, hiding behind children when it's advantageous, but ignoring them when they prevent her from catching a random handsome guy? If this is not toxicity, then what is it? It's not about toxicity. It's, it's a matter of choice. She straightened up. It was solid ground. This is a matter of freedom. My body, my choice. Linda, let's ignore the fact that you're using a slogan designed to support women's rights to justify sex with an asshole who drives an Escalade. Let's just ignore that for a second. You claim that you have the right to pick up a guy at a bar, go to his place, and have sex with him, regardless of my wishes. Is this more or less your position? Yes, but let me finish. You're talking about choice. So, you also chose to marry me, build a life, have children together. When you made this choice, you were not in an adequate state. I didn't twist your arms, right? Fine. Yes, she said with hatred. Linda, these choices to have sex with a random guy and build a family with me cannot coexist. You have to choose one or the other. For most of our marriage, you chose our children and me. At Morrison's, you chose another man. And since you changed your choice, I changed mine. You have no right. I hit the table. I have all rights. I looked at her. I also have the right to say, my body, my choice. I have the right to choose the woman who will stand by my side to protect our marriage, who will turn her back on sex with a handsome stranger for the life she claims to value, someone who shares my values and has a modicum of integrity. To hell with your decency. Her face turned purple, and I wondered if she was going to hit me. You just don't have the courage to deal with it, so you, you run away like a hurt boy. And you hide your behavior behind children and some vague idea that you are a free, independent woman in the world. Let's be honest. You're saying that women are equal to men, and by the way, I agree. But if so, they also bear equal responsibility. Have you ever heard the phrase, with great power comes great responsibility? Is this some kind of Obama quote? She rolled her eyes. No, it's from Spider-Man. Linda grinned, and I smiled back. Of course, Stan Lee was not a feminist theorist or a famous social critic, but he is relevant here. You demand equal power in our relationship, but refuse to accept equal responsibility. You want to be a big, strong woman who makes her mark on the world, but when it suits you, you happily hide behind the preconception that a woman is automatically a better parent simply because she can give birth. You want society to ignore your body in the boardroom, but are ready to use it in the club, in the bedroom, or in court. You want the great power that equal partnership implies, but you do not have the courage to honestly accept the great responsibility that this power entails. This is nonsense. I simply refuse. I refuse to let a man define me. You are not my master. You are not my supervisor. Enough, I said sharply. You think you're a radical, but ultimately you're just another woman who got horny watching two men fight over her and picked the winner. Nothing could be more primitive, more banally traditional. I chuckled. Here's a hint for you, Linda. Satisfying your sexual desire through a serious relationship does not make you a radical rebel. That doesn't make you Che Guevara. That doesn't even make you Gloria Steinem. That makes you a terrible wife, a terrible mother, a terrible person, and a terrible fucking feminist. To be honest, everything went downhill from there. A few days later, I returned home to the guest room, of course. Although I would have preferred to avoid Linda entirely, her job still required her to come to work from 9 to 5, and she relied heavily on Mrs. Porter, who was still angry with her, to take care of the children in the morning and afternoon. Emma and Tommy were suffering, and it was time for me to take responsibility. As soon as I returned home, I quickly returned to my normal schedule of balancing work and childcare. As for Linda and I, we managed to avoid arguing in front of the children mainly by completely avoiding each other. I consider this a victory. Meanwhile, my lawsuits continued to slowly move forward. It turns out that I actually left DNA on Lavaliere's ring. This, combined with video footage from cameras in the Morrisons' parking area and in the back hallway, firmly established that Lavaliere, Moses, and Smith beat me. They hired lawyers and managed to negotiate a deal, reducing the charge to simple third-degree assault, which carried a small fine. On the plus side, they were also obligated to pay my hospital bill, and by the time the new season started, Lavaliere had been traded. I heard that Detroit is even colder than Buffalo. The assault conviction came in handy when 10 Lavaliere victims, including myself, filed a class action lawsuit for intentional infliction of emotional harm. Moises regularly recorded Lavaliere's nightly adventures at Morrison's, and his videos with comments were shown in court. All plaintiffs received seven-figure compensation. In my case, it was a low seven-figure sum after Bailey took his cut. He also took part of the six-figure compensation we received from Morrison's for their involvement that night. Let's just say that the video of the bouncer helping me a little was very helpful. I'm still trying to figure out where Bailey stands as a friend or a lawyer. Linda hired a lawyer who I believe took one look at this whole mess and advised her to sign the papers. Eventually she gave in and we started learning how to co-parent. Our conversation at my parents' house revealed that we both carried a lot of resentments that were affecting our behavior around our children, so we began seeing a psychologist to build a less toxic relationship. It took a lot of time and yelling, but we found a way to communicate with each other with politeness, if not warmth. We also sent the kids to a psychologist, but kids Emma's and Tommy's age tend to adapt pretty quickly, and we eventually got to the point where we could be in the same room without letting the monsters from the past rear their heads. I never saw any other couples after that night. I had heard rumors that Dee and Dave had broken up and Jane and Phil were having problems, but I never sought out the details. Honestly, I don't care anymore. And so, a year later, I found myself without a wife, but with a fat bank account, mostly consisting of Mark Lavaliere's money, most of which I invested back into my business. I am still the primary caregiver for my children, and lo and behold, they've already switched from Frozen to Wall-E. It's a good movie. I give him 6 months before I start hating him. Life has become much better. While I'm still processing some things from that night, I'm also building a new group of friends. I can imagine a time in the not-too-distant future when I'll be ready to start dating again, at least on nights when Linda is with the kids. But not all the scars have healed. I still hate watching the Bills and have become the only Miami Dolphins fan in my area. Bias is real. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click